So welcome everyone to the second day of the Urban Resilience in the Context of Climate Change conference. I'm Helene Fourniere and from UN Habitat, City Resilience Global Program. And this morning, for the next hour and a half, we'll speak about co-production of knowledge for more equitable and effective adaptation together with our 5 really nice speakers. So to present briefly this session, climate change adaptation and urban resilience challenges requires a co-production of knowledge between different fields to be really effective. Research, policy, and funding institutions demand research collaboration across disciplines and connecting science with society. In this regard, this session explores innovative approaches to bridging knowledge gaps, as well as citizen engagement initiatives such as participatory approaches towards more equitable and effective adaptation so that no one is left behind. So to the attendees, feel free to send us all your questions through this platform, and we will have some Q&A time at the end of the session to really answer all of your doubts or comments or everything that you feel that should be clarified. And we will start with Corina. Corina is a design strategist, researcher, and facilitator. She's a PhD candidate at Imperial College London, where she investigates the role of systems approaches in bridging theory implementation gaps in urban resilience. In parallel, she's a principal design strategist at Forum for the Future, a non-profit working on sustainability at international level. So Corina, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helene. Good morning, everyone. And how lovely to be here in the second day. I really enjoyed the first day, so I'm looking forward to see what today is going to bring. My presentation is going to focus on systemic approaches for urban resilience capacity building and look at the role of the International Urban Resilience Academy Summer School as a case study. The sort of the context that this is situated within is really given by the city's IPCC research agenda, and that's where calls for learning how to use holistic approaches have been made. That's where the sort of the context for the need, the why do we need systems knowledge has really been highlighted, really to kind of understand the interactions, the interdependencies, and the various correlations that happen in cities. Also, there is a need to develop new methods to assess synergies, trade-offs, and co-benefits. And lastly, and this is really where my research is situated, there have been calls for advancements in action-oriented research. So really trying to understand and keep up with the rapid urbanization that is happening around us. Within this context, I undertook a literature review to kind of better understand what is the lay of the land in urban futures, really trying to understand where are interventions being advocated. So the findings from that literature review have been that although through a large palette of urban interventions, there are calls for systemic change, they are very much seen as an outcome of those interventions. So very little consideration is given to the means of how we will achieve systems change as an outcome. This means that this negotiation between the trade-offs that we need to make in terms of decision making needs to really account the values from which we make decisions, but also the underpinning worldviews of the types of knowledge that we take into consideration. And finally, one of the implications is that we need to focus as much on process as we focus on outcome when we're advocating, devising, or implementing interventions in urban resilience. So within that, my research seeks to explore this question around how might systemic approaches help us bridge the knowledge implementation gaps that exist in urban resilience. And there's 2 different parts to this study. On the one hand, trying to better understand what the gaps are and how do they occur, but also on the other hand, really kind of taking cue from the city's IPCC to understand how might we intervene? What does action-oriented research look like? So the research question that underpins that is, how might systemic approaches help bridge these gaps? in the context of a capacity building experience that is led and designed by the International Urban Resilience Academy Summer School. So to give you a bit of context about the summer school, so there have now been 2 editions. The first edition was in September 2019 in Copenhagen, and this edition took place in 2020, and it was online. And as a team, you can see the various amazing people involved in this initiative. As a team, we've kind of really thought about, well, what does this mean, the shift to online? What does this mean for learning? What does this mean for community building? But very importantly, what does this mean for knowledge transfer? And how can we be adaptive ourselves in the context of this pandemic? So my role within this team has really spanned the sort of the research side of things, but also the design and the facilitation of the programs and the process design. And within the 2 cycles, so cycle 1, as you can see, we've had 26 participants, 21 nationalities, and quite an even split in terms of policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. And one of the key criteria for the summer school recruitment is that applicants need to be in their mid-career. So we're looking for people who have at least some considerable experience, either in practice, either in research, or in policy. While the second cycle, so the one that we've ran online, we've had 25 participants from 20 nationalities and from 14 time zones. So you can imagine the type of sessions that we've had to navigate over a whole month and trying to work with everyone's diaries, but we made it. And I think there's lots of lessons to kind of understand there. How might we adapt? And also how might we make capacity building more accessible as well? When I talk about systemic approaches, what I really mean is the ways in which we might define and intervene in complex situations. So the complex situation here is given by the statement that has been identified in the city's IPCC research agenda, that there are multiple knowledge implementation gaps in urban resilience. So the sort of the first step or the first phase is trying to understand, well, what are these gaps and how do they occur? So this is something that as a team, and this has been very much a collective effort, as a team we've undertaken semi-structured interviews with the participants, but also with the contributors to the summer school. So we've got an ongoing research project that we're hoping to share some findings from to really kind of understand, to kind of create a baseline of what are these gaps and how do they occur. Secondly, and this is really where my sort of research comes into this as part of my PhD, is looking at, well, what might we do about this? How might we intervene in the problem situation? And this is really about my role in designing and facilitating capacity building programs that really look at bridging these gaps. So some of the data that has been collected as part of that is looking at specific reflective workshops that we've held during the summer schools, looking at the pre and post summer school surveys, but also analyzing the types of outputs that the groups have developed in the summer school as part of the summer school challenge, as well as hosting and facilitating reflective sessions with the facilitators group. And lastly, and this is really where this year and the next year are coming into play. The next phase is looking at how might we sustain an intervention. So a lot of the times when we kind of intervene in a complex situation, one intervention is not enough, obviously. So then the question is, well, how might we sustain this change and what might this look like over time? So this is where the concept of a community of practice has been really helpful in what we're trying to foster with the alumni community. So this is where I'm facilitating a series of community of practice sessions. I'm also interested in understanding, well, how are then the alumni and the participants collaborating, but also how might we build community among the different alumni groups. And the systemic approaches also apply to the summer school process design. So if we just zoom in to how the summer school was designed, my sort of approach has been to develop something that is called the DIAL framework. So almost kind of like 4 phases, looking at how might we diagnose, how might we imagine, so really kind of taking methods from systems thinking, from futures, and from design, and then how might we act and learn. So this is really where intervention and strategy design comes in, but also M&E and systemic approaches to learning. A couple of preliminary findings really quickly. There's something about the complexity of integrating, but also valuing interdisciplinary evidence-based and practice-based knowledge. Also, the fact that policymakers, researchers, and practitioners are driven by very different time horizons, very different incentives, but most importantly, very different success factors, which means that actually, you know, that everyone is kind of pulling in different directions. Importantly, there seems to be a lack of spaces for reflection and integrating learning from failure. And this is partly due to the fact that a lot of the times dissemination strategies focus on best practice and success stories. So there's really not that much space from learning from what has not gone so well. Also, lastly, there's a lot of competing methods, tools, and initiatives. And sometimes this is down to organizational business models that have become very product or project-led. And this is creating a competitive environment rather than a collaborative environment. And I also want to share a few implications. So what might this mean for capacity building as a systemic intervention? Well, on the one hand, we need to focus on enabling communities of practice rather than seeing capacity building at the individual learning outcome level. And I think this poses really big shifts for how we design capacity building. There's also a need to focus on know-how as well as know that. So there's a need to focus on practical knowing, supporting people on the how, on the implementation, on the application of knowledge, rather than just trying to transfer knowledge transfer as content knowledge. And this is again very important for capacity building and the types of learning experiences we offer. Thirdly, there's a need for systemic literacy, but this really means that we need to understand power, we need to understand trust, and we need to understand relationships.
Can you please summarize what's left, because we don't have so much more time for your presentation?
Yeah. So I guess lastly, we're going to keep going with the 2021 program and also 2021 community of practice experiments. But also we're wondering, what is the minimum viable infrastructure to support communities of practice? But also, what does replication and scaling look like? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Corina. This is so interesting, and I actually heard about that summer school through some of the participants, and I was thinking, wow, I should participate and really take part of community of practice in urban resilience, because this is the future for sure. Now we will continue with Priscila. Priscila Barros Ramalho Alvez is a civil engineering with Master of Science in Water Resources Engineering from Brazil. Currently, she's a PhD student at the University of Exeter in the UK. Her research is developing a social environmental approach for flooding management, including the proposal of mitigation solution. And she's going to present us today place-based citizen science for assessing risk perception and coping capacity of households affected by water-related hazards. So Priscila, please go on. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Priscila Alvez, and today I'm going to present for you part of my research in my PhD. I'm doing a PhD in engineering of University of Exeter, and the title of my presentation is Place-Based Citizen Science for Assessing Risk Perception and Coping Capacity of Households Affected by Water-Related Hazards. So just to start, I put here some photos, as you can see, and the hazard that we're going to focus today is the flooding. And as you can see on the photos, we have the flooding in both developed and in development countries. And this is very important. The hazards can lead to disasters, but this will depend on the vulnerabilities in place of each place. So just to exemplify very shortly this, you can see here on the UK on 2020 that we have vulnerability related on this photo, right? So we have some vulnerabilities related to people and also infrastructure. On China 2017, we have vulnerabilities related to people, transportation. On USA 2015, we have related to transportation and people and infrastructure. And on Brazil 2020, this photo, so this year, we have vulnerabilities also related to people, again, transportation, infrastructure, and also other vulnerabilities like garbage you can see on the street, on the flooding actually, on this photo. So this context can be very complex depending of these vulnerabilities in place. In each one of these photos, people are facing the hazard in a different way. So it is very important to us to understand what is the perception of each one of these residents and also how they are coping with this hazard. And this is part of what I'm going to present for you. So risk perception and coping capacity. And just to finalize, this can be even more complex in places where we have more than one hazard. So in my case, the city has both flooding and also water shortage. So we are looking into this. As part of my research, we are also applying citizen science, and this is what I'm going to show to you. So the citizen science, as you know, is the science to society, so to support the society, and also it's a participatory practice in which people mostly contribute with observation and efforts to the scientific enterprise. Our research questions is exactly what is the risk perception and coping capacity of residents to deal with flooding and water shortage, and also how do social factors of the city influence in this risk perception and coping capacity to each hazard. You can see here some photos of our participatory approach in Brazil, and I'm going to present more about it now. This in the first map that you can see on the screen, you can see the semi-arid region of Brazil, and the city of Campina Grande. It's seated inside the semi-arid region, which means that the city is facing the water shortage. But also, as you can see on the second map, the city is urbanized, and between these and all the vulnerabilities of the place, the city is also facing many problems with the flooding. The project that we made in Brazil was last year. It is called Planeje project, which means to plan extreme events. In Portuguese, planeje eventos extremos. And here you can see this map where we went to Brazil last year from May to June of 2019, and we made some engagement strategies. So we applied some surveys, we made some workshop meetings, focus groups, and these points in green that you can see are the location of the households of the residents that we made the interview. So in the end, we had 172 residents that participated, and also 27 authorities and specialists. So almost 200 people that participated in our project. Today, I'm focusing more on the results of the residents. So as I said, they are facing two hazards. We prepared the questionnaires with a 5-point Likert scale. And as I said, we are interested in see how it is the risk perception and coping capacity to each hazard. So we selected some indicators that could show us how it is this risk perception and coping capacity. And we compared to some social factors according to the socio-economical and demographical characteristics, informational and geographical characteristics of the city and where they live actually in the city. And these indicators here, so awareness, worry, preparedness, and knowledge are related to the risk perception. In coping capacity, taking adaptive measures, adaptive measures in the future, and also permanent measures in the future, so to the residents. I'm going to speak about the results of comparing both hazards, but since we don't have many time, I wanted to present for you our spider chart that we prepared with each one of the indicators. So you can see in blue the flooding and in orange the water shortage. You can see that we had some differences. It was expected, of course, that it was not very similar because we know, and I am from the city, so I know that the situation is sometimes is easier to a hazard and more complicated to the other one. So today I wanted to focus more on two indicators, which is the preparedness and the responsiveness. The first one, we asked for them how likely they receive a warning before the hazard. So how likely do you receive the warning before the flooding and water shortage? And you can see that the results were very different, which means that they receive more warnings before the water shortage than the flooding. But as you know, the flooding occur just in some days of the year, for example, but it's very fast, and we have many cases of flash flooding in the city, so this can be a bit complicated to cope with the hazard if they don't have an idea that on the next day or in the next hours is going to have a strong rainfall. And also the responsiveness, which we asked for them if they have any measure to protect from the flooding and water shortage. And we can see that even though the flooding is very strong on the city, they have more measures related to the water shortage than to the flooding. So we are looking into and this is the second part of my presentation, how do social factors interfere in each one of these answers. For example, here we prepare some graphs to each one of those factors that I presented for you before. So here you can see for water shortage, house ownership, presence of children, income, education, age, gender, and also to the flooding. But since we don't have many time to discuss each one of these graphs, I wanted to focus more on the income, which is very important. So the city is kind of mixed. So we have people that are more rich and also people that are more poor. And when we were applying the questionnaire, it was very, very clear for us that they had different measures in place. And actually, as I said for you before, this was one of the questions that we applied to the residents. So you can see here on the photos 1 and 2, some of the measures that they have in place to protect to the flooding. So most of them just have the barrier in front of their homes, and this can change according to the condition of the people. So some of them, as you can see on the first photo, they have more infrastructure, so they kind of do better, and they kind of buy some barriers and they put on their homes. And on the second photo, they have less money, so they kind of do something, and this in the end can protect from the hazard, but also affect the way that they are living, because, for example, just in this photo, they change the height of their door, so they kind of prefer to live with this than to apply other measures, and actually they don't know how to protect from the hazard. And also on the photo 3 and 4, you can see about the water shortage. When the last photo, you can see a water tank. This is very common in our city, in Campina Grande. So people usually buy the water tank. I'm sorry.
Can you please shorten the end of your presentation? Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I'm finishing now. And they have more infrastructure than people that are more poor, for example, where they just have the water butts. In the end, this is the last part of our study. We also looked for some influence according to some statistical tests. So we analyzed each one of the social indicators according to the risk perception and coping capacity. And we can see that in the end, both geographical and also socioeconomical and informational social factors can interfere in the way that they see the hazard, so the risk perception and also the coping capacity. So this strategy that we applied over there, so the place-based citizen science, it was very good. It is a tool to understand the social needs and challenges. It's an opportunity to increase the dialogue and participation with the different stakeholders, and also allow us to tackle specific indicators to improve the risk perception and coping capacity of residents. So this is it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Priscila. That was really interesting. I have some questions for you, but I will keep them to the end. Now we will hear Madhav. Maroju leads design, engineering, and technology practice relevant to built environment and cities, focusing on appropriate technology, including digital twinning, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and big data. Madhav trust involved is evangelizing SDGs and innovation by extending capacity building programs and advisory. I love that word, evangelizing SDGs. Wow, this is so interesting. So today, Madhav will present us urban hazard and risk profiling through city information modeling and integrated emergency life cycle management with real-time participatory approaches. So Madhav, time to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this conference. Let me share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
No, for now, still not.
Yeah.
And yes, we have.
Okay. So here we go. I would set the premise, to start from the end with this video. With these point cloud visuals, kind of reflections, symbolically, I would like to set the context, stating that city is a complex system of many moving parts, which are multidisciplinary, multifunctional, nature-made, and man-made. But the point is, today our progress in technology alludes that this complexity can be simplified by digitalization to make our cities highly responsive and resilient. The parts are like dots that can be connected for improved visibility, transparency, and accountability. As you see, we can digitize swiftly reality as is, which enables us to act in real time. That's where the whole ecosystem of data comes into picture. By the way, these dots are sub-centimeter accuracy, so it is left to our imagination in terms of what is the potential that it can offer. So I leave here and then get to the context. Yeah. So the whole context is set in terms of where the vulnerability elements are in the city. And then can we connect those vulnerability elements in terms of, where are they, what are they, when they happen, who are responsible, why is it happening, and then how it's happening. And then can we symbolically represent that data as part of a digital twin? So where we say it as a single source of truth. So which can be open, which can be precise, accurate, reliable, and foolproof. Now that's where you can enrich the urban data. But then how do we find? So where do we start? So from, let's say, God's way, we go to man's view. As I speak, these are the floods which are happening in Hyderabad. I'm sure it is the global news. For the last 3 days, it's been pouring, basically cloudburst in Hyderabad, which have kind of flooded the whole city. City of Hyderabad is like 500 odd lakes which were there, and then it was more popular for rocky outcrops. The rocky outcrops were grounded, and then lakes were filled for real estate development, and then today you see the whole city is flooded. So it proves the point that natural water channels and stormwater drains are affected during rain events, especially when you don't have the smooth flow of these channels. Like Priscila was talking, is the same reference. But then we go a bit beyond. There's another video, mostly in terms of dilapidated buildings, which is another big issue in metros. So that goes to ask a question whether our cities are of hope or hype. So basically, cities are vulnerable, and then most vulnerable cities are hit hardest. A case in point is city of Mumbai. It's about 5,000 odd square kilometers. again, we have, similar situations in terms of a lot of vulnerability elements. The city is affected with coastal erosions, landslides, flash floods, and what have you. But then we try to, put together some of the points in terms of physical environments, dilapidated buildings, encroachments, landslide spots, hill spots, high tension electrical lines, low-lying areas, floodplain settlement, so on and so forth. So I have a bunch of visuals. Before visuals, the areas have been zoned, but then there is no pinpoint information, and then this goes on forever in terms of statistical data is being retained, but then no focused efforts in that. So to get to a focused effort, perhaps you have to have a broader spatial data and geographic information with high accuracy geometric data. That's where we are heading towards in terms of what it really means by point cloud data. There are some statistics of Mumbai. About 20,000 multi-story buildings are listed as dilapidated. Some of the visuals of the dilapidated buildings. About 270 flood-prone areas. Then this is another context of stormwater drainage, siltation. Then roads, about 6,000 odd potholes which affect the traffic, which affects in terms of the infrastructure challenges the city has. Then the other element is in terms of the development control regulation issues, where there is a lot of violation in terms of encroachment or in terms of excessive constructions, so on. Then slums, which again are classified in terms of notified, recognized, identified, so on, but then not much of concern has gone in terms of pointed analysis to see that when floods come in, these low-lying areas where the slums are can be rehabilitated, or where are the zones where these can be moved. Then some urban services areas in terms of water and sanitation access to the city residents. So the point is, we need a baseline data. Needless to say, that baseline data needs to be of a high quality, quantity, and then the sources are really foolproof. So we have built in the whole methodology to come to a point of a comprehensive city information model, a composite approach in terms of the best of the technologies that are available, from a drone-based methodology to LiDAR-based methodology. LiDAR, which would cover terrestrial, mobile, airborne, handheld, in order to kind of make the whole data all-encompassing and all-pervading. Like I said, how do we achieve at that sub-centimeter accuracy level, so as to build in the profile of the vulnerability sites, and then what are the measures that can be taken to fix those vulnerabilities. So some of the pictures in terms of the captures that we have done. So we had a very systematic approach in terms of the whole assessment process for the vulnerability profiling. So first level is to identify through the rapid assessment, and then get into detailed assessment, and then later into engineering assessments, where the engineering measures are required to fix those vulnerability elements. So the whole data enables us to have a variety of engineering measures which are critical from the engineering inputs point of view for the city governance to fix any of the physical environments. So these outputs are both again 2D and 3D, where the engineering teams can work on visualizing the whole change that they can see with the help of these inputs. So we have seen all this data going into one singular spatial and a geometric database, and they're all interconnected. I'll take you through some of the solutions based on the interconnectivity. For example, how do we assess the dilapidated building? So we have a methodology in terms of spotting those, and then pointing both with geometric measures as well as where these are located. So a detailed methodology for each type of vulnerability is associated as part of the body of knowledge that goes into the city information model. Likewise, in terms of encroachments, encroachments across the railway lands, encroachment across the water channels, or encroachment across the notified government lands, whether they are suitable for habitation or not. So these kinds of detailed inputs in a 3D environments help a lot of visualization. So wherein the whole format that we have put in is to have the physical environment first virtualized, integrate all the elements, then visualize for whatever the measure that you want to take, and then take the actions through a decision support system. So I'll jump to the decision support system where all the departments can work in a singular environment where communication and collaboration can happen. For example, lands and buildings department, the planning department, and urban services department are part of, a single ecosystem. So that single ecosystem is driven by a single source of truth, the database or the baseline database, which is part of the CIM. There's a kind of dashboards which would help. These dashboards can change with respect to different departments, which would be very focused to those departments, but there are any interdependencies with the other departments. So it's a lot more easier because you are on a singular ecosystem. The point is that the right hand would be able to speak to the left hand. So that's where it becomes, more systemic. So a little bit deep dive there in terms of interactively looking at the built environment, the map, and then your management information system or your geographic information system. So there's kind of an integration that happens between different systems. At a micro level, you have, for example, your dwellings can be registered along with the dwellers. So if there are vulnerable dwellings, so where are they? And then, so we have given power of, mobile apps in terms of pushing that data from the mobile where they are in case of any emergency. So that's posted back into the CIM, and then there is a ticketing that can happen and then goes into the command and control center as well. So some of the statistical data and then some of the profiling information, which is part of those systems, what we call as integrated decision support system. Again, going to the street level, so you can pinpoint the physical irregularities. Let's say a pothole. What is the size of the pothole? So you can really geometrically measure the pothole and then the impact of that pothole, and then from the finance point of it, what it's really going to cost. So you can have those financial modeling based on the geometric data available at a high accuracy level. So there are some videos, I won't be able to run those. So this is part of the citizen engagement and then, ticketing and then issue tracking and so on and so forth. Coming to the conclusions. Basically, we are looking at both, where are the vulnerable sites? What is the level of damage right now? And then what is the potential damage over a horizon? And then how it gets into the loop of entire, disaster continuum, so that it is cyclic. So you have these periodic data collection, which is, kind of holistic. And the whole process is also faster because you can have the surgical collection of data these days, given the drone potential. So you really don't have to, spend a week together in terms of, surveying and then getting that engineering grade data. But then you can swiftly fly the drones to the location where you really want that data to merge or, purge with the existing, city information data. So I would conclude with, a few pointers that the whole process is much faster and flexible than we could think of, in the traditional methodologies using satellite imageries or, planimetric imageries. Then the data is precise because you have the geographic data interrelated with the, non-spatial attribute data coming from other systems. And then you're validating that as well, at a system level. It's cost effective because there are multiple users from multiple departments that they can benefit from. Then it is at different layers. All the stakeholders can use the analytics and then communicate through the dashboards. It is interoperable and it's a cloud platform, so you don't really need to have native systems. So that's how the whole methodology that we looked at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madhav. For sure, we want to hear more about it. So now we're gonna start the Q&A part of the session. We already have 2 questions from the audience. The first one is directed towards everyone, and the second one is directed towards Montse about the presentation on bingo. So perhaps we could start with a more specific question and then focus on the ones that can let you all kind of answer. So, and then I have a bunch of questions as well, but if there is more questions from the audience, feel free to send them. And if you have questions between your presentation, please, we have some time for that as well. So the question from the audience to Montse is saying, congratulations for this interesting session. I couldn't see who were the stakeholders involved. Did local platforms such as Badalona Mar denouncing CSO spills were engaged during the bingo project?
Yes, they were involved from the very beginning. We identified several platforms. I cannot say for sure if Badalona Mar was involved, but for sure the fishermen and some other entities, the harbor, some other entities regarding the coast and the beaches of Badalona were involved. I would say that Badalona Mar, yes, but I cannot say because there were, at the first workshop we were like 50 participants, and then in the other workshops we were less, around 30 or so. But yes, they were informed about the project and the objectives of it, and I think they were involved in some of the workshops. I know that Badalona still has problems with CSOs. I mean, with the bingo project, we made a first step to try to find the best solutions for Badalona to cope, not only for CSOs, but also for flooding. But as you know, the Mediterranean climate meteorology is very, it has a lot of extremes, and Badalona is one of the cities that suffers from high intensity rainfalls that, despite having actions or management actions to reduce the impacts, there were some of them that cannot be managed yet. But the city council is working to solve them.
Yes, the city council was part of the consortium.
Yes,
so
yes,
I'm sure now
it was
you have
partner.
a wide range of things that should be addressed to do adaptation and mitigation and to build resilience for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Montse. And now this question is for all of you. It came after Priscila, so I guess Priscila will be the first one to answer to it, if you can. So how do we deal with interdisciplinary topics when some specific area is too thin without a real depth of science? So your opinion on this area would be great.
So hello, it's very complicated, I would say. So, for example, in my case, I have a background in engineering. So when I got and I started reading, and I saw the importance of integrating, different areas, different disciplines, and I'm still learning how to do it, because it's very complicated, because you need to involve different areas in order to have a more reliable result. And when you think like in our area, like what I'm trying to do is to propose some solutions for the area. So for the flooding and also for the water shortage, then you start seeing how it is necessary to involve different people, different areas, different sectors. And it was very clear, as I said in my presentation, we also made some engagement strategies with authorities and specialists when I was in Brazil. And even during the workshop, for them, it was very clear that we need to insert different areas and different sectors. So I think, in my opinion, it's not easy, but it is worth, and it's something that we need to do. So I can say, like, in this conference, I saw many different presentations, different talks, speaking like about the importance of doing it. So we have some challenges, but I would say that, yeah, we should do it.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. I think that if we never do it, we will never know. So, and when there is no real depth of science, perhaps it's also our task to develop it and search for more and do research and go on. Actually, when we started the City Resilience Global Program in 2012, there was not so much information about city resilience. So I guess it's something that we developed and we went on, and that's research. Anyone else would like to answer on this really interesting question?
I'll take that. Science cannot be in silos. So we really have to see that there is a collaboration between, different science experts or, different functions. You really have to nudge and then let them kind of have a cross-fertilization or cross-pollination so that they exchange. So in one department has got a particular problem, so that problem should be known by the other department so that they know the connectivity of that problem. So it becomes all the more important to see everybody is not just talking about their problem and then somebody within their department is trying to fix that problem, but then let others listen. So that listening more helps in terms of, cross-fertilization of the knowledge. So you would have a broader body of knowledge. Else the standard operating procedure particular function would have would remain in that. So there is no fresh thinking within that department. So awareness becomes, more challenging. Awareness, competence, and then training between these cross functions so that there is a succession in terms of, collaboration and communication between all these functions. So I would say there has to be a, methodology to cut across the silos and then see you're all on the same page.
Thank you very much.
Chip in, I would really agree with Madhav, and I think it's interdisciplinarity, but it's also multi-sectoral that I think is missing, and multi-sectoral collaboration is also really hard. And I think it comes back to all of us needing to value more what other people bring and the expertise that they bring to an issue. Like sometimes, and you kind of see this, like you come from a discipline and then you can only understand things from your own lens, but and actually stepping outside of that lens is quite uncomfortable. If you're a social scientist trying to understand statistics, or if you work just in quantitative methods trying to understand qualitative methods. So I think, it's about all of us as researchers, as practitioners, policymakers, really kind of being lifelong learners and accepting that we don't have the full answer and we just need to keep being curious and a bit humble as well. Like sometimes you get that disciplinary supremacy, and it's like actually no discipline has all the answers.
Oh, that's such a great conclusion for it, but let's continue on it. I really agree about the fact that we should be lifelong learners. And something that you said, Corina, is about we should have a place for learning what did not go well. And it's because it's part of the process. It's something that we should be ready to share as well. And not just lesson learn as good practices, but also what should not be done again because it's not working. And this, if you want to discuss a bit more about that subject, that would be great.
Yes, this was quite a big finding from the interviews, but also from the summer school experiences themselves. Like this is something that the participants have brought up over and over again. And I think it's really important, but it's also important to understand why, what are the incentives that mean that we don't share what has not gone well. And I think if you look, for example, at research and academia, the drivers that you have and the success metrics that you have in terms of publications don't really reward failure stories. And it's the same in practice. I think a lot of the times it's really hard because of organizational strategies, and because, you know, like everyone is applying for funding, there's a lot of projects that need to happen. So, and also it's a tough topic. So sometimes you do want to tell the good stories, because otherwise we're all going to be demoralized, and it's really hard to keep going. So I think there is almost kind of creating spaces to kind of share learning and learning of what has not worked well. But I think you also need for those spaces to be safe, because obviously there's a lot of sensitivity involved. There's a lot of things that, you know, have potentially affected people, and have affected the outcome of situations. So I think there's almost like you need spaces almost like in between. So not necessarily broadcasting and saying, oh, this program has failed, because obviously that is not, it's a lot more nuanced than that. But I think you then need spaces between those communities of whether they're practitioners, whether they're policymakers, whether as researchers, to really kind of nurture this almost kind of like reflexivity, to really kind of be able to critically stand at the end of a project or at the end of a process and say, what could we have done better? What are the things that we can learn for next time? And I think this needs to be built into project funding and into the cycles, you know, like speaking from my own experience now, this is always the thing that we run out of time to do, you know, to kind of do the last bit of what would we do differently? And then by that point, you're starting a new project and and the funding has ended. But I think this is important, and we need to support each other in that space without shame. I think that's the important bit.
Thank you very much, Corina. I totally agree with you, and this is such an important topic. Now we have a new question from the audience for Maria. Firstly, thank you for the great presentation. I am wondering, what was the final decision for the polder?
Yes, so the solution that the farmers initially proposed was further defined with help from other stakeholders, designers, association of the farmers, and the government wanted to push for another solution. In the end, during the EIA process, 3 solutions were drawn, and based on the political decision, it was the solution of the farmers with the terps. So the farms, half of the farms stayed in the polder, the others had to leave. They chose who to do this and who was closer to the part that was initially to the part where the farms were stayed. So they succeeded, but it was there was a lot of there was a mix of influences that helped for this.
All right, thank you very much, Maria. Do you have any question between each other? And meanwhile, you can think about it. Now I'm going to ask Madhav, which you mentioned that there is in your title that it's real participatory approaches. So, and you mentioned citizen engagement towards gathering data. Is it feedback from the inhabitants? Is it what's that part of your presentation that was kind of really quick and really short? And I would like if you could.
Sure. Sure. I mean, on having the baseline data established, so we clearly know every inch of the city. So these were done in pockets, but then the citizen engagement is through a web-based and a mobile-based facility, which is again location-based information. So citizen can really instantly report the situation. So in fact, even the surveys are also conducted while, for example, affected or identified dweller or dwelling information, and the number of dwellers, and then what kind of problem that they have been facing, so on. So at the first level, even at the let's say baseline data collection beyond the spatial data is built through the advanced technology, but then the non-spatial data is through, I wouldn't say crowdsourcing, but then, pointed collection from the, citizens. So that's the first part of baseline data integration. The second is when an incident happens, then citizen has the power to, capture that incident. Let's say even if if the urban services are not met, if a garbage has been not collected and then it is being accumulated, and then there is a insect infestation next in a small pond, so that's not been kind of sanitized or what have you. So you can take the picture and then the spot is identified, so that location is again geolocated in your city information model, so you exactly know where that location is, and then you can escalate the issue with the that particular zone officer or a ward officer. So the ticketing system happens, and then it gets into the cycle of charter. But we have seen, several municipalities, they are, really bullish, and then, kind of one-upmanship in terms of bureaucracy, stating that they have the citizen grievance system. But when I met the folks, it's pretty long. I take this question because the folks, when they showed, so there are about 8,000 odd tickets which have not been addressed for the last 3 to 4 months. When the commissioners or when the officers were confronted, why these have not been asked, because we have the mechanism to collect the problems, but then we don't have the mechanism to fix the problem, so we have only accumulated the tickets. So that's where the gap was. So then how do we really get to the next level of keeping a charter that you have identified a problem? So we have seen a variety of problems like chain snatch, or robbery on the street, or a street light not working, garbage not being picked. So these problems are not being addressed, and then when we really put that before them, and then the system is kind of becoming a nuisance, because we are bogged down with looking at these tickets. So you might as well come and report the problem in a registered physical book at the office. So then the whole beauty of the system has been beaten. So it's like a conundrum right now. The system is enabling the transparency, accountability, and traceability, but then it is too much from the administration point of view to address. But then where do we find the answers? So some of the answers, I think, one of our participants have spoken about, how do we empower at a neighborhood level. So is there a methodology to co-create? Because the co-creation, if you're empowered with that information, your local information, and then perhaps other non-governmental entities can come and play the role. So this empowerment can happen with the information that can be extended to them. So you keep this entire city information model with some of the accessibility to the affected people or enablers, then certain things can really happen at a tier 2 or tier 3 level within the city. So it's part of our co-creation model that would work. So however, to answer your point in a conclusion fashion, so you have upward information, and then you have a downward information, which is part of cohesiveness in the system.
All right, thank you very much for detailed explanation and for going through this question. We have a new question from the audience for Maria. It's amazing to see a process from the 90s revisited now through the lenses of co-creation. Which opportunities and challenges it brought to study a process started almost 30 years ago?
Yes, so our study was based mostly on literature review, document analysis, and interviews with the stakeholders. Challenges were that the process started in 2000 and it finished in 2015. Many people are, of course, not working in the places where they used to work. They are doing other projects, or they moved to other parts of the country. So it was a bit, sometimes it was a bit hard to track them. Also, it was a bit difficult for some of them to remember all the details from then. So that was also a challenge. And everyone, because it's a huge project and there were so many stakeholders, you always got, but that's also the beauty of it. I think you always got different stories. So you had to kind of build your timeline and your story from all these stories. So that was also a challenge. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria. We have a new question from the audience for Corina. Can you elaborate on the contribution of the summer schools initiatives to resilience capacity building?
What a question. I will try. So I guess the premise by which we're starting is that we need to create spaces for people from different sectors, but also for people from different disciplines to come together. And our focus at the moment is on mid-career professionals. The Southern Denmark University has also started a series of summer schools for bachelor and master students. So we're also kind of looking at almost kind of like the entire life cycle. And we're also looking at the sort of the expert contributors that are, they're forming part of the advisory group, almost kind of like seeing them as our elders. So looking to them for mentorship, but also to really kind of understand from their own experience of how they've navigated and how they've kind of, how their career to date has kind of, has led them to where they are. So our sort of contribution to capacity building is we're hoping that this is providing a bit of a 101 in systems approaches for urban resilience. So we're looking at introducing both sort of methods, looking at how might change happen. So methods from systems thinking, methods from futures, methods from design, but also looking at what I called in the presentation at content knowledge. So really kind of doing a bit of an overview of what is the state of the art in terms of urban resilience knowledge. So really the sort of the topical knowledge. And this is done in a very sort of experiential learning. So it's very much workshop based, but we're kind of seeing this as an episode that really introduces people to a community. So almost kind of like the biggest outcome of the summer school is that you kind of leave with a sense of, okay, this is what the lay of the land looks like in terms of the different types of knowledge that exist on urban resilience, the different perspectives, the different methods by which we might approach complex issues. But then really the biggest outcome in terms of capacity building is this support community going forward. So we're really kind of taking a lifelong learning approach. And this is part of the experiment as well, because there are no sort of business models for lifelong learning, like trying to support people throughout their career development is actually quite difficult. But this is part of the commitment that we have in kind of saying, well, for capacity building, we really need to foster communities that can help each other learn through peer learning. But also peer learning doesn't just happen if we do this. So, you need investment, you need facilitation, you need time. And these are some of the things that we're kind of experimenting with. So, at the same time, people are driven by different motivations. So you have people who come on the summer school and are there to just, learn a few new tools or kind of meet some speakers or, get a certification at the end of it, and who aren't necessarily as interested in the ongoing community aspect. And that's also fine. So I think different people take different things. And I think it's almost kind of like creating that space for people to decide what do they need for their own development and for their own capacity building. But with this, we're kind of hoping that actually what we're doing, almost kind of like the under sort of motive, is like we're really hoping that we're starting to act on some of the knowledge implementation gaps by fostering collaboration between different types of professionals, which is perhaps, like a sideway tactic, but it's worth trying. I don't know if that's answered the question.
It is really great. Thank you very much, Corina, very much. It's really interesting. Actually, I don't have any other question from the audience, but I do have one for Priscila, because I think that what she spoke about perception and coping capacity is really interesting in the way that I would like to know if it's replicable, because you use the case of Campina Grande in Brazil, but this to speak about citizen science, to look at, try to transfer the information that is qualitative into a quantitative matters is gonna, I would like to know if it's possible to replicate it and if it's flexible enough to adapt to any kind of places.
Yeah, so yes, the idea is exactly this. We built the methodology behind in order to achieve, like, not only in developing countries, but also developed ones. So that's why we have the different indicators. but it is expected that when you are applying a different country or even a different city, of course, sometimes in a different neighborhood, so we're gonna have different results. So that's why in our methodology we try to cover different areas, because we know that in another place then an indicator will be stronger or weaker in that area. So it is the expectation is to apply, should be flexible in different places.
All right. Thank you very much, Priscilla. Do you have any question between each others?
I have a really quick one, which is, what one hope do you have for what knowledge co-production can achieve?
So anyone ready to answer that? You can see Maria smiling.
Yeah, I think it's a really good and hard question. I hope that, as I was saying in the presentation, I think we have to manage our expectations. Maybe we're going to be surprised in a good way. I think that the more we practice this, probably the more we are going to achieve. So that's one of the things that I think. So we should keep doing this, even if it's harder at the beginning.
I would take a different note on this. Like I was trying to put across, whether the cities are of hope or hype, that goes to the same point of reference. Within our circles, in terms of practitioners or in terms of academicians or the legislators or enablers, so the knowledge is within this circle, but then the knowledge has to go down tier 2, mid of the pyramid or bottom of the pyramid, so that in a simplistic manner, if we can convey that there are possibilities. So this body of knowledge can be kind of synthesized and then put together that can reach out to the bottom of the pyramid. So then the actions can happen from bottom of the pyramid. So of course, you would have top down and a bottom up approach, but then when you enable that, things becomes easier. So I would say that's the way forward to keep the hope. How do we have a methodology or a mechanism to, percolate that knowledge to the mid and bottom of the pyramid where the real beneficiaries are?
Thank you very much, Madhav. I think we have to wrap up. Thank you very much to all of you. I think we have to create space for all, act on the gaps through community of practice, through involvement of stakeholders, through creation of stakeholders, consortium, and listen, be lifelong learner, and do not be ashamed to share. Do cross-fertilization to the knowledge. We should really take into account local and regional stakeholders that are key to define realistic adaptation strategies for more equitable and effective adaptation. Yeah. So thank you very, very much, everyone, speakers and the participants, for attending this session. And the next session will be at 11. And if you would like to hear more from Monse, she will be leading a session on nature-based solution in cities, the key for climate change adaptation and increasing resilience, which will be in room 1. So good luck, everybody, for your work, and see you soon.
Thank you
so
all
much for hosting it.
Thank you.
Thank you.